Well, it is at the top of the hour. I will go ahead and start. I know there's several people still joining us, but I will go ahead and start the session. Thank you to all of our panelists and to Peter today for hosting this webinar. Um, we're talking about heat safety today, and we have some very experienced folks on our panel to help us guide us through how to prevent this preventable hazard. I just want to talk about the agenda. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, great. To kick things off, we'll have Peter Goldwasser, the Executive Director of TSR. And then we will have our esteemed panelists, which include Dr. Doug Casa. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Corey Stringer Institute and Board of Trustees, distinguished professor in the Department of, say it for me, Doug.
Kinesiology.
Kinesiology at the University of Connecticut. We also have Dr. Caroline J. Smith, PhD, Associate Professor and Director of the Thermal and Microvascular and Physiology Lab at App State. And to round out our panel today, we have Bill Richards, DOT Safety Manager from PepsiCo, to give us some real life experience with dealing with heat on the front line. So before I turn it over to Peter, I did want to say that although we do have panelists, we want to hear from everybody. TSR Talks is a place where we like to hear all of our voices together. So please participate in polls, type your comments, questions into the chat, raise your hand if you want to share an experience or if you have a question. During each panelist, if you have a question, please just go ahead and chat and we will get to those questions after the panelist finishes. Um, before I turn it to Peter, does anybody have any questions? Yep. All right, Peter, can you kick us off?
Fantastic. Thank you, Jess.
Mhm.
Welcome, everybody. I think if nothing else, we came up with a really good title for this conversation, Too Hot to Haul. I like that a lot. So I'm thrilled that we've got Bill and Dan and Caroline here today. Earlier this week on a prep call, it was just very nice to sit back and listen to real experts in their respective fields talk about issues that they are so passionate about. And so we're going to hear Bill's going to talk directly from the driver perspective, and Caroline's going to talk about various interventions that they've seen with companies. And Doug's going to talk about what does this all mean? What's the big picture? How did we get here? Why are we here? Why does it matter? And so for me and for Together Safer Roads, I wanted to welcome you all. One of our main responsibilities as an organization in the road safety space really is to create opportunities for experts and for our members in the communities to come together to talk about serious, important issues, sometimes important, hopefully important and fun, but always important. And this issue of heat-related illness is a critical one, and it's across industries. It doesn't matter if you're hauling or working in waste, or if you're delivering food and beverages, or if it's last mile delivery, or if you're in the construction industry, whatever it is, the current state of affairs in terms of our environment and climate and how workers are working is heat and the implications of it, both for the everyday situation now, both for the drivers, for the communities that their trucks are driving in, and then the long-term implications are quite serious. And so I think what we're hoping today is to be able to hear from the experts, learn and get examples of specific interventions, but also talk about some of the larger, what are the systems in place that need, what systems exist, what systems need to be created and modified to ultimately protect drivers. So I'm thrilled that we've got a really robust panel to hear today. We encourage folks to raise hands throughout, ask, well, I don't know if your hand per se, but type in the text messaging, ask questions. We'd like for it to be a robust, honest, open, and relaxed conversation. So again, thanks everyone for coming and attending. And with that, I will turn it back over to Jess.
Thanks, Peter. I just launched our poll. We just are kind of curious about what you'd like to hear most about today. I'm going to give it 20 or 30 more seconds for you guys to respond, and then I will turn it over to Dr. Casa to start us off. The question is, what topic are you most interested in learning about today? Warning signs and risk factors, cooling strategies and PPE, building organizational policies and programs, or educating frontline drivers? Um, some of you are still responding. I'll give it a few more seconds. Looks like cooling strategies and PPE, followed by educating frontline drivers and building organizational policies and programs. Um, you all may be familiar with warning signs and risk factors, but I'm sure you'll probably still learn a lot from this presentation from Dr. Costa. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds good. Are you going to do the bio or do I?
Sure, yeah.
No, no, or is that just something you shared with them before, which is fine.
I just shared with you before, but
Perfect.
yeah.
Perfectly. We're all good. I don't have to take that time. Um, all right. Does that look good, Jessica?
Can everybody see? I can't see your presentation.
I'm getting some thumbs up. That's good.
Yeah.
Oh, you can see it? Okay, y'all can see it? Okay, good.
All right. So honored to be here. It's very much in the wheelhouse of what we do here at the Corey Stringer Institute. We're assisting laborers with issues in the heat. So I'm excited to be here today. My just as a um, preamble, my goal is to share resources with you, not necessarily try to teach you everything in 15 minutes. My goal is to try to give you access to some information that you can do a deeper dive beyond this. Very briefly from my own background, I feel like it's a bit of a trifecta. Like I've done a lot of research in the space of heat safety, and we've published over 400 papers, but I've been in the trenches and personally done clinical care for 405 heat stroke saves as an athletic trainer in the athletic setting. But I've also been an expert witness on about 80 cases in the labor space and in the athletic space when things go wrong. So I have learned a lot examining cases in the labor space when unfortunately people have succumbed to the heat. Just a little bit of background of some of the stuff we do. You can see these two books here, Sport and Physical Activity and the Heat, related to performance and safety, and also preventing sudden death in sport and physical activity. So those things intertwine when we're trying to integrate heat safety, one for performance, but also for safety issues. Just a little bit of a background for us. We work with a lot of America's largest companies and are their heat mitigation provider. So UPS is one of the companies that we assist. Delta Airlines is another big company that we assist, and there are many others, but those are two big recognizable brands that I feel like you'd be familiar with to give you an idea. Just as an example, with Delta, we're doing 8 airport visits this summer to go below wing to examine the, potential heat mitigation strategies for their employees. In fact, we're doing one of them tomorrow. Just to give you a little bit of background on what I do here at University of Connecticut, we have an environmental lab where we have people do labor tasks in 100-degree temperature for 7 to 8 hours in a row to mimic what a worker actually has to face related to heat and hydration issues and humidity. So we're opening another heat lab, but this $1 million heat lab is opening actually in the next couple of weeks, which we're very excited about. So it's actually called the National Laboratory for Labor Heat Safety. This is some of the construction that's been going on here the last couple of weeks. But very excitingly, I wanted to mention for potential collaboration with anybody who's on this call who may work with companies that want to work with KSI. We're opening our first satellite heat lab at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville, and this gorgeous facility that's being built. So if you ever want to study different textiles, different equipment people have to wear, or strategies you're thinking about using with your company, you could partner with us and we could help you. I'm doing a quick background. I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but kind of just a refresher for some of the common heat illnesses. I want to just make sure I go over these because I know you're not all necessarily heat experts, even though I know you're safety experts, but to just do a little deeper dive. You're all aware of exertional heat stroke. Heat stroke is the one heat illness that you can die from. And the key when someone's having a heat stroke is to cool them as fast as humanly possible. 100% survivability when someone's temperature is under 104 within 30 minutes of presentation. So it's really important to have policies and procedures in place that can identify this and get help to people. But also, there's a lot of ways to prevent a heat stroke from happening in the first place. And I'll share some of those here. You're well aware also of heat syncope, that's someone fainting, and that's really important. This happens a lot when people change posture, which would happen a lot for your clientele and drivers who are seated, for instance, a long time, and then they're standing in the heat, or they're standing for a while, and then they sit. A lot of people, you get postural hypertension, low blood pressure with moving, and the heat simply itself is not dangerous, but obviously the fall is quite dangerous, depending on where you are and what risk that could pose. Cardiac events are much more likely in the heat, especially for the clientele you serve. I mean, these are 30 to 70-year-old people or 20 to 70-year-old people you're working with. So we're much more likely to have cardiac events. So it's not officially a heat illness, but you're much more likely to have heart attacks and other cardiac events in the heat. So we need to be well aware of that as well. You're aware of heat exhaustion. That's just the inability to continue exercise in the heat. You cannot die from it, but someone will be, very fatigued, will not be able to continue work. Heat cramps, not as critical for us to talk about right now, but obviously is an impediment, but it's wouldn't be considered dangerous as much. Okay, so I'm gonna let that go right now. Just briefly, you guys were probably aware that during the Biden administration, we were working on a federal heat standard, and although that's now been paused, but it does give us an idea of some of the things that people were thinking about nationally that would be in a heat standard. And these are some of the things you can see listed here. I won't read them all, but I'll talk more about these in a second as well. And this is just an example of some of the stratifications that we were coming up with in the federal heat standard. And the orange, the darker color, and the red would be based on what the environmental conditions are, and preferably the environmental conditions being measured via wet bulb globe temperature and not a heat index. Just a reminder for everyone who's on this call, if you're ever looking at environment for your employees, heat index was developed for people who work in the shade, and who are in shorts and a t-shirt and who are walking at a low intensity and not doing intense labor at all. So people loading or unloading vehicles like your employees, that would not be practical. So wet bulb globe temperature is much better. These are the states right now that have heat standards, so it's very important for you because I'm sure almost all of you have people who are working for your companies in those states, and many other states have them under consideration. For instance, Connecticut, we just testified at one of our state political events recently. So this is very important to understand that these are states that have specific things in place, and a lot of other states are working on these right now. And I think you'll see this be more aggressive now since the federal heat standard is in a pause situation. This is just an example again of three of the ones that were on the map just now: California, Washington, Minnesota, some regulations related to outdoor workers. So some of this would be practical for your employees. I want to mention this quickly. It's a little more scientific and a little less practical. But a lot of times in the past, people use information that were collected with military people and with athletics and apply that just to the laborers. And I think that's a big mistake. The reason I do is that most athletes that we've studied are 20 years old. Most military people are in their low 20s. And you know that laborers are often between ages 20 and 70, and they have comorbidities. They have a lot of medications that they use. They're working 12-hour shifts instead of a 2-hour practice. They have to do the job. They can't cancel practice. Like the job has to get done or they might not get paid. So there's a lot of different situations in the labor space, and we need to rely on good information from laborer research to make our decisions. So I just wanted to mention that to you, and this is a whole other conversation all by itself. A couple of just research studies that are relevant that we've recently published, just this one combining hydration and cooling at the same time. It sounds super simple, but this is what your drivers need to be thinking about. Like, do they have mission cooling towels as an example that they're wetting throughout the day with cold water, and putting it on their head, neck, shoulders, and back, and in addition to hydrating with cold fluids. When you do those things together, that gives us the best benefit. So you can do those things alone, drink alone, cool alone. But when you do them together, you have people whose heart rate is lower, their body temperature is lower. And there's just a lot of benefits when you both do cooling and hydration at the same time. A lot of people think they're taking care of themselves just by hydrating, and there's a lot more to it than just that. So this is another couple studies we've just done with these mission cooling products as an example. This is one of our heat labs where we do this. So this is like 105 degrees and 60% humidity right now while these people are exercising. We were looking at different cooling modalities. We did specific laborer tasks. So we're doing things where they have to like do squats, lift things, carry things like that. And it's just to give you an example that we try to make it practical. And they did that task for like an hour in a row, and then they have to walk, and then they have to do it again for an hour. And it happens throughout the course of a day. All right. This is another example. We did a study from Milwaukee Tool, and they're doing this overhead lifting and apparatus and having to use fine motor skills in a 100-degree temperature, and those kinds of specific skills that are very relevant to laborers. And one of the studies with Mission, like we're looking at all the different things you can add on. So someone's in the sun, maybe you give them hydration, maybe you also give them shade, maybe you give them cooling, maybe you give them cooling during the activity and not just during breaks. So we did all those different interventions. And not surprisingly, the more things you add on, the more benefit you get. And I'm not going to go through all these slides right now, but the greatest, when you have all of the interventions together, we had the lowest body temperatures and the lowest heart rate. So obviously, from a safety perspective, they're better off. And it's just not expensive. These are like $40, $50 worth of cooling products and just having cold water available to them and having shade when practical. So that's just an example of that one. We just published this one a couple weeks ago, and it was even simpler than that. It was just, did they use cooling products or did they not through the course of a workday? And we found people to be able to perform better. Their tasks throughout the day were significantly better for productivity, doing something super simple where they would just need a cooler filled with ice and water and cool themselves periodically throughout the day. You're well aware of obviously this document, the NIOSH recommendations, which is kind of like the gold standard for laying out some of the practical applications of heat safety. There's a lot of good information in there, but a lot of it often just boils down to what I just shared with you in the study. Hydrating, having work to rest ratios that are appropriate based on the environmental conditions, and having shade. So knowing the environmental conditions is very important because sometimes you need to modify the work to rest ratio when it's hotter out. I'm not a big person of saying you have to cancel things or not do things, but you just sometimes take precautions and just allowing a little more leeway for safety while they're doing their work. So some of the occupational factors contributing to heat illness, which I know you know all of these items, but people are in different situations. They might a lot of times don't have air movement, direct sun exposure. They're doing heavy exercise sometimes. There's sometimes not workplace regulations. A lot of times they're wearing a lot of protective clothing and equipment. And I mentioned to you before the labor space, the individual characteristics. These people sometimes are older with comorbidities and on medications. It's the comorbidities on medications that changes everything for these people, and their heat tolerance is less. One thing I think is really important to understand, I think the greatest protector of exercise heat tolerance is fitness. And when you have people in their 50s and 60s, and they have comorbidities, especially cardiovascular issues, a lot of times their fitness is not good. And that's why they tend to have less exercise heat tolerance. So education, I feel like in a lot of these workplaces do not exist or they're just not done well. So we really have to think about how we can make education better and not just having a PowerPoint slide that, someone's not interacting with or just, is playing off in the corner. We really need people to require the education because there's some companies that don't require it. It's just optional, and other companies that require it, I feel like it is much, much better off. So we published this paper also a few years ago, looking specifically on how to modify activity based on the environmental conditions, and labor space was one of those components. I'm not going to get into this again. I'm showing you resources, and it was an example of different work to rest modifications based on different wet bulb globe temperatures. And all these resources, we can share these after the talk, and Jessica can make sure you get these items. There are other workplace modification recommendations that are out there from OSHA and NIOSH and ACGIH. So these are other just making sure everyone's familiar with these resources. And we know this is just a huge problem. They think that 1.8 billion labor hours will be lost by the year 2100, and that's per year, at $170 billion per year because of the influence of the heat. So global warming, climate change is happening much faster than anyone had even anticipated. Even the greatest experts had not predicted how fast it would change. From the day I was born in 1968 to now, the heat waves and the heat season is 3 times longer than it was from the day I was born. So it's just crazy to think of, and it's obviously only going to get worse. So I tell these people what I call the heat tax for companies. These are additional costs companies have when they don't take care of things properly in the heat. Things like decreased productivity, If they during a workday, what happens if they have to leave the work setting, increased costs related to injuries and illnesses, lawsuits that could happen, long-term medical care. There's a lot of things that happen, and that's why the previous slide I just said of that big cost, this is where that cost is coming from. It's real. One heat stroke case, if someone survives with long-term disability, could be three, four, $5 million for the company. Okay, because the people will have organ damage and long-term medical care, right? And if someone does die, the settlement could be, I mean, I was just on a case that was $39 million and another one that was $21 million that the company paid to the family. All right. So we have had also published stuff related to productivity. We have found with companies, and I am almost done if you're getting nervous, Jessica, I did time myself. The we have found sometimes companies are more motivated by productivity than by safety. So we have also done a lot of research to show, and I've showed them to you before in the mission studies, and this was an overview, this particular article, showing how productivity decreases when you don't have heat mitigation strategies. And that sometimes motivates companies to make these educational strategies and put the money into having the cooling products and the hydration. And again, I'm not going to go through all this right now, but these are some workflows that you maybe can share with your supervisors to motivate them to increase your budget for the things that you want to do for your workers. So I'm just going to end with just there's a lot of ways you can use cooling, and I mentioned cooling to before. You could douse it, or you could just have cooling towels, which would be easy to use, or hats, or gaiters, or bandanas that you just if you re-wet them with cold water throughout the day, they can be very effective with cooling people. So you could see we've done people have done review articles showing that it's almost universally performance enhancing when you do body cooling for people who are exercising in the heat for a prolonged period of time. The last thing I'm going to end with is this. In 2021, we published a roundtable on safe workplace practices. What my co-speaker, one of my co-speakers today, Caroline Smith, joined us on this. And we looked at 8 different key factors that someone who supervises someone in the heat would have to consider. And they're listed there. Again, I won't say them all, but they would make sense to you all. But these were kind of like a best practice document on the things you need to consider. And there's a lot of good tables and figures that I think you can use for education, but also use when you're dealing with your supervisors and also the people that you supervise. So I'm not going to go through all these right now. That just is an example, I think, of an incredible resource, this document from 2021, and we'll make sure this PDF is shared with all of you. This is an example of a flow chart. Should a company have a heat acclimatization program for their employees and a yes/no processing down? I think you'll find some of these things related to how you monitor weather conditions and some details related to that. I think this is profound, how you create cooling opportunities for your workers. Like, do you have electricity through the day? Do you have power? Like, do they come back to a central location? And there's all these different potential plans based on your specific scenarios. And this is the opportunities in all the different plans of the different things that you could consider in those scenarios. So these are just great resources that come from this particular document. So I just wanted to say thank you. I know I went over by a minute or two, but I hope this information is useful. It was, again, just to let you know there's a lot of great information out there, and the science is constantly evolving right now. Understanding the labor and the heat is a really big topic right now, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Costa. If I was looking overwhelmed, it was because I was thinking about the multi-million-dollar settlements that
Yes,
could have been prevented with a cooling towel
super simple. Yeah,
or
I'll-
just
let me say one thing, Jessica, because you brought up a great point. I was in an oil and gas situation, and there was two different cases from two heat stroke deaths. One was 21 million, one was 19 million. So it's $40 million the company was giving up, and I had calculated per year it would only be $300,000 for all the cooling strategies, all the hydration, all the ice for all the people who worked at that setting for the whole year, just $300,000, and they lost 40 million in just two lawsuits in one year.
just in one.
And I think that I was going to bring that point up as well, because often in the context of transportation, we're thinking about the economic implications of crashes and the
Hmm.
nuclear verdicts and so forth. But I think there's this strong analogy here where we don't
Yes,
necessarily bring that same point of view to the economic implications above and beyond the health and safety of the workers,
yes.
obviously, from the heat perspective, but is certainly, I think, analogous and something that we should consider.
That's why the slide I had called the heat tax gets a lot of people's attentions when I'm dealing with companies because when they think of it all collectively, it becomes just much more overwhelming to them.
The other
Mhm.
aspect as well as before we move on to Caroline, I think, is that in some regards, the the ability to control for and create systems may be easier than it is when you're planning for how to avoid crashes and so forth, right? Like obviously we spend a lot of our time thinking about systems both from training and technology and vehicle design on the crash avoidance front. However, there seems to be almost that many, as much, if not more, policies and procedures and interventions, and it may actually be less unknown variables out there to control for when we're talking about
Mhm.
heat. So in certain regards, it's almost we may be able to make significant progress and reduce
Oh, I
risk.
totally agree. There's a lot of progress that can be made. That's a great point, Peter.
Yeah,
Thank you.
exactly.
Onwards and upwards. Jess, take it away for our
Uh,
next speaker.
That's right. No, thank you so much again, Dr. Casa. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Caroline Smith.
Hi everyone, and thank you for the invite to present. Just can you guys see my slides okay?
Yep.
Perfect. As I say, thank you for the invite. I really appreciate this, and to present for you and to present with Dr. Kasser as well. It's a privilege to share some hopefully useful information. So really leading off that presentation, I'm going to delve into a little bit more detail on a couple of things, but similarly, we're not here to throw too much information at you in kind of 12 to 15 minutes. So it's really just an overview. And I'll also provide a lot of the resources that I'm sharing with Jessica afterwards. So brief introduction. Similar to Dr. Kasser, I just want to show you roughly kind of where I am. I'm in Boone, North Carolina. I'm an associate professor at Appalachian State University. We have thermal chamber. We do work with a range of different populations in our chamber and in the field. And in the last few years, I've actually moved into more the occupational space. We largely work with the fire department, which obviously have their own set of challenges with the environmental heat load, PPE, and so on. So we've been working in that space, but not only from a heat standpoint, from a contaminant standpoint, and I think pollutants and these kind of multi-stressor environments are going to become important as well. So just a quick disclaimer. So obviously this is for educational and informational purposes. So it's not in any way medical advice as I move through this talk. So again, really just kind of leading off what Dr. Casa presented is really understanding vulnerability to heat-related illness and injury in the occupational space and not really trying to apply things from athletes and other populations because it really presents a unique set of challenges. So if you look at the EPA, they estimate between 5 to 10 million workers in the US are exposed to environmental heat beyond safe levels on an annual basis. A lot of this can be construction workers. Again, it can be fleets. It covers a lot of different groups. And as we all know, the warmer average temperatures and the increased frequency and severity of heat waves is causing issues with occupational heat illness risk. And this is really just kind of echoing again what Dr. Kasser mentioned. This is kind of some recent data. It really was just published very, very recently, a 2025 paper. And just to orient you to these graphs, and again, I'll share these resources. What you can see on either graph, we either have WBGT, which is kind of the ideal. They've also shown ambient temperature. But what you'll notice is this U-shaped graph, and it's to do with work time loss. And it's this U-shaped graph, meaning at either extreme, you get losses in productivity, essentially, with the ideal kind of obviously being in the middle. It's about an ambient temperature of about 18. Again, you can see WBGT's kind of mid-teens. And so we know at the extremes, that is a productivity issue for companies. But on the other side of things, there's a huge safety issue for the workforce. And again, as I mentioned at the start, I work primarily with the fire department, but I do think this is relevant to other groups. When you have to consider a multi-stressor environment, a lot of the time you have dehydration, heat, pollutants, noise, vibration. And so those can actually all have an enormous effect on acute and long-term health, immune function, cardiovascular disease risk, and so on. And we were just talking the other day in our kind of pre-meeting about this, and Dr. Kasser mentioned some of the longer-term effects we're going to see from these repeat acute exposures, particularly with cardiovascular disease and increasingly with kidney, so renal issues as well. Those things are coming to light more recently. Now, when we look at occupational heat illness, about 50 to 70% of outdoor occupational heat-related fatalities occur within the first few days, and it's actually around 50% in the first day, 70% in the first week. And so really what this lends to, and again, I keep saying it, but leading off Dr. Cass's talk, is that preparing people for the heat and heat acclimation is a huge issue in addition to physical fitness, and is very preventable. Education is a huge thing, knowing signs and symptoms, knowing the major risk factors. Some of them are obvious and some of them aren't. Medications, underlying disease, again, dehydration. Some are less obvious, recent infection, even sunburn. There are a few that aren't quite as well known. And then developing that heat safety plan, and I'll touch on some mitigation measures for the last part of this talk. So I just put this together, really just pulling out some of the more important components of what might be feasible, sustainable mitigation strategies for some of the workers. So heat acclimatization, acclimation is when you do it kind of more forcibly in like a chamber. So acclimatization is really just getting workers used to the environment. And I'll share some resources that were from our recent paper a couple of years ago with Dr. Kasser, and also CDC recommendations at maybe reducing the intensity of work and kind of increasing workload and exposure over time. We'll talk a little bit about PPE and clothing, and this is kind of twofold. Having awareness of how PPE and the clothing being worn by the particular workforce might hinder heat loss, but then also other solutions. Thinking about ventilation that's in clothing. I've seen little fans put inside shirts. You can look at phase change materials, ice vests, and so on. Considering work rest periods. Now, this may not be feasible in a lot of settings when there are tight deadlines, and that can be challenging. But if working in cooler hours is feasible, it's something to think about, and considering rest periods. Again, the cooling strategies, I'll talk more about. You can cool the environment, or you can cool the person. Cooling the person tends to be a little more feasible and cost effective than air conditioning, for example, which is also not great for the environment. Physical fitness, Dr. Kasser mentioned, is actually a really big issue. And so encouraging wellness programs and improving fitness can reduce risk. Having a little health checklist, and I know obviously being careful with medical information and what's required by the company, but again, recent infection can increase risk, and so it's having the awareness and maybe doing a little check at the start of a shift. Hydration strategies I'll touch more on in a second. Again, this is really big as a risk factor. And then education is a huge part, again, from recognizing heat-related illness and injury and some of the risk factors. Monitoring the environment is hugely important. And again, as it was previously mentioned, some people are pushing for stopping activities at a certain and work at a certain WBGT, but the monitoring is hugely important for understanding the risk. Also, a lot of the information provided tends to apply to healthy populations, but when you have vulnerable groups and when you have groups with underlying illness and are taking medications, further kind of care needs to be taken for their risk. So just going through a few things, kind of, so I want to be mindful of time, going through some mitigation strategies. Heat acclimation is a process that allows the body to basically adjust. It's hugely important in the workforce, in the occupational space. Obviously, the military and athletes use this as well. The lack of acclimation is a major risk factor for heat illness. And as I mentioned, 50% of deaths often happen within the first day and classically the first week. Similarly, I'm not going to stand here and kind of lecture you on physiology, but this is a nice graph. You're welcome to look at it, really justifying why you should do heat acclimation. This is Julian Perriard, and I think it was Mike Sorka. It's a really nice graph just showing you % of the adaptation that you're going to get, exposing people gradually to heat, maybe gradually increasing their workload, and the days of acclimation. And what you'll notice is things like sweating can go up, within the first 8, 9, 10 days. Some physiological responses can take a couple of weeks. And this is why you should kind of gradually try and up the workload and acclimate people to the heat over kind of 1 or 2 weeks. It's kind of the rationale, which again, you're welcome to review those physiological responses. Now, the paper from 2021 that Dr. Casa mentioned, there are different sections about heat hygiene and hydration and all these mitigation measures. And there's a chart that you're welcome to go through. And again, we'll provide the resource, kind of a flow chart of when you should acclimate people. You know, are you exposed to high heat? Do you wear PPE? Is it physically demanding work? Have you recently been exposed to heat? And so this provides guidelines actually based on the CDC saying, okay, just to kind of emphasize this, you really should reduce the exposure and reduce the workload and gradually get people used to what they're doing. And so these are some guidelines that were provided in that paper. This also is just a resource. I'm kind of more or less familiar with some of these technologies, but physiological monitoring, this can get more expensive. Heat flux sensors are kind of coming into the space a bit more. The accuracy is at times debatable, but heart rate monitoring to look at physiological strain, core temperature monitoring. So again, some of these can get a little more expensive and more complicated, but even just heart rate monitoring could be something to consider. And last few things to finish up, personal cooling is a big one. And again, I'm just kind of picking some of the key points here. This is actually a review article. Again, I'll provide the reference. This is showing cooling interventions and the effect size. Basically, if you kind of head more to the left, this is not good. And sorry, more to the right, that's not good. And more to the left, it's a beneficial practice. And this was in kind of resting and healthy individuals. Heat acclimation is up there as one of the big ones, and aerobic fitness, and then hydration practices. So this is just emphasizing some of the best cooling interventions or strategies for reducing physiological strain. From the same paper, you can also see here again, if we go head towards kind of the left of this diagram, you have a detrimental, this is beneficial on the right. Really what I want to draw your attention to is things like cooling vests and garments, again, ice packs, phase change materials. I mean, even putting things that are damp on you are beneficial. And then things like ventilation, so fans, and again, fitness level. These are all some of the most beneficial things that you can use to try and improve physical performance is actually the metric here on this graph. So personal cooling, you can cool the environment, as I mentioned before. Typically, you think of air conditioning, but that is not great for the environment. It can be expensive. It's not always feasible. And so personal cooling is more efficient and sustainable. So electric fans, Ollie J at the University of Sydney has done a lot of work on this, and his group has done a lot of work. There's been a lot of debate in the last few years about when you should use fans and when you shouldn't. They are suitable in hot, humid conditions, and there's debates about what temperature is appropriate. They've said 35 Celsius. His group argue it's higher. And it's actually detrimental in very hot and dry conditions because it increases the heat load. You're just blowing more heat onto people and actually dehydrating them potentially as well. So this information was in resting adults, and they were aware of the fact that with a very extreme heat, if you're increasing convection, you may actually increase dehydration and cardiovascular strain. But fans are basically a very effective and fairly cheap cooling strategy. And again, this is just a resource showing you the action plans of, okay, you can use fans typically up to about 35 Celsius, 95 Fahrenheit. Ollie J's group and a couple of other groups have challenged that now and said, actually, you can go higher. So again, I'll provide the resources on that, but fan cooling is a very good strategy. Okay, so I know we're almost at time. So the last two things are hydration strategies. Some of these, kind of like Doug mentioned, can be actually quite basic and don't need to cost a ton of money. Just keeping an eye on urine color, monitoring weight change during a shift. You know, if you're down a kilogram or a couple of pounds, that's probably not great. And sensors can be used, but they're more expensive. I've seen in the military addition of salt to try and then retain water has been used and is more beneficial often than some of the electrolyte loading for hydration. Beverage temperature is a little controversial because if you drink stuff that's too cold, it can actually end up suppressing sweating. But drinking and hydration is very important, obviously. And then education of signs, symptoms, and being aware of the cognitive decrements you get with dehydration and heat illness. Okay, that's problematic, particularly in fleet workers with crash risk. The last one is clothing and PPE. So typically wearing light colored loose clothing. The one thing that came out of the review paper that I shared the kind of graphs for, compression garments can significantly increase core temperature, so they should absolutely be avoided. In general, I've seen arguments about should you wear wicking or cotton, or I have seen some papers showing form-fitting wicking synthetic materials are more comfortable and can actually be beneficial. So considering the clothing being worn or kind of undergarments being worn, again, light colored, potentially loose fitting unless it's wicking. Removing PPE if it's possible and then safe to allow evaporation of sweat and cooling. Consider acclimating people or maybe using PPE less if it's not necessary, obviously with safety considerations. And then phase change materials, that could be ice packs, materials that actually change shape. There's all sorts of things kind of out there. So take-home points, I think really reiterating the seriousness of heat-related illness and injury. I think people often do not understand the seriousness and obviously heat stroke in particular. Educating the occupational workers very specifically to their occupation, recognition, treatment, and even a buddy system. You know, you get cognitive declines when you get heat stroke or even heat illness, and then particularly with heat stroke, decision-making can be impaired and aggressive behavior and so on. And then develop feasible, sustainable heat safety plans tailored to that workforce and that job. And that includes things like cooling the environment, although that can be costly. So personal cooling with fans, particularly when it's humid, although consider temperature and hydration, temperature and humidity. Hydration strategies and monitoring are very, very important. Consider the clothing if it's adding load and mitigating heat loss, or do you have strategies that could actually improve heat losses? And then monitoring of the environment and personal monitoring if possible. And again, just direct use, there's some CDC resources that are great, that just give you kind of some overviews, a very simplified view. So again, we can share these with you: drinking water, rest breaks, shade, buddy system. A lot of the basics are kind of covered in some of these resources. So with that, and now I'm a teensy bit over, so I apologize, Jess.
You're fine. This is great information. No, I think we've all learned a lot of things that we could add to our heat safety plans and some things that may challenge our assumptions about how to cool workers and mitigate heat-related illness. So thank you, Dr. Smith. I want to get to Bill Richards. Just a quick note on Bill. Doug, Dr. Casa had mentioned a lot of the studies were completed on, folks in the military. Well, Bill has experience in the military. He was a former Marine, so he can speak to that and his work as an industrial athlete.
Thanks, Jessica.
Yeah.
So I'm very humbled and thankful for the opportunity to be able to speak today. In kind of my story, the incident that happened to me, I was a young Pepsi driver, just hired on, trying to prove myself. Ended up getting a bulk route, and as they say, sometimes the hurrier you go, the behinder you get, and driving the truck a little bit quicker than I should be, or not watching my corners. I bump a curb, and I knocked over a lot of 2 liters in the back of my trailer. And it's a very warm day. The temperature outside was in the 90s. Inside the trailer was probably in the hundreds for sure. And now I'm behind. I've got 4 pallets of 2 liters on the floor of the trailer, in a big hurry to try to get this corrected and fixed, and didn't pay attention to the weather, or rather to my sweating and how bad the heat was. All I could think of was I have to keep on schedule. I don't want to get called out or have a work performance conversation with my supervisor. And again, as Jessica said, I spent 11 years in the Marine Corps, had been through some extensive desert training, so knew some of the signs and symptoms. And sure enough, it kind of hit you all at once. And luckily, I kind of recognized I was starting to get into that. I was able to seek shelter and get some cooling or get some fluids in me, but it affected me all day, the rest of my day, and in how it affects our driving. It really makes a difference. You're not as sharp as you should be, and again, we're In our case, we're driving an 80,000-pound missile down the road, and you have to be aware. You have to be sharp to do that job. And yeah, luckily for me, I was able to cool down. It was, as they say, and already from all the information we've been given at the time, I was very fit, and I think that probably helped. But for sure, I would tell everybody on the call. I guess the takeaway from me would be watch your new people. They're new, they're inexperienced. Um, and you have to kind of keep an eye on them closer than you would be your senior people. They kind of have that tribal knowledge of doing it over a longer period of time. They know a good pace to work at. So for us, I keep my eye on my new guys. I like to visit them and make sure that they're okay. And luckily for me, I had managers who would send out texts to make sure that we force drank water and hydrated. So there were some benefits at particular managers that I had at the time. But that's kind of my story. Um, not a huge one, but still one of the takeaways from me is watch your inexperienced people or your young people who are trying to prove something, and they have a tendency not to want to draw light to themselves, especially if they're not feeling too well. They don't want to lose a job. There's other pressures that come into play there. So, but Jessica, that's really all I have. I don't know if
No, I think that's perfect. I think that's an excellent point to watch out for those new folks because they're trying to prove themselves and they're going to push through those symptoms that they may know, but they're going to push through them a bit. A
Jessica,
lot of Sure.
one question I have for Bill, I think is, are there instances of where sort of there was a disconnect between company policy and real world sort of implications, and where, one said this is the best practice, but from your perspective, and I think Brian in the comments there said, right, just the importance of hearing from the drivers, where you found that if you did this or that, this actually was a more successful intervention and remedy. I'd be curious sort of from your real world experience there.
Yeah, I think in I think one of some of the real world experiences that they had later was the cooling towels that were given out to drivers as well. So some of the inexperienced drivers, again, I being the inexperienced guy, didn't have a cooling towel with me. All the senior guys had them, the Gatorade towels that were handed out to everybody. So I think sometimes the coaching that can be given to your new people is huge, and sometimes that hey rookie driver, where's your cooling towel? It's going to be in the 95-degree temperatures today. You're going to work without your tools. So that would be, you know, having that checklist like you guys have talked about is huge and makes a difference at the end of the day. And training people up, I guess that passing on that tribal knowledge to our younger people to me is the benefit that we have. You guys have all kinds of knowledge, and sometimes getting it down to the, as they say, the getting it to the where the cows can get it sometimes can get kind of difficult. But that's something that I've seen in my time in working as a driver. So hopefully, if that answered your question, I'm not sure if I did. So okay.
No, I think so. We have about 10 more minutes. Does anybody have any questions for Bill or for Dr. Smith or for Dr. Casa? And or do you have any best practices that you can share as professionals in the industry?
Yeah, so no questions in the chat, but a lot of good conversation and dialogue. So I would just encourage anyone in the chat who has ideas that you want to share with everyone, feel free to just unmute and share your ideas. But there are, several listed here, and Bill, a couple comments thanking you for sharing your story. Everyone appreciates that real world advice. So just some kind of comments about we mentioned worker fitness being a key part of this. So just people acknowledging that the fitness of, fleet workers is something we all need to contemplate, but I'm curious, how do you kind of integrate that strategy into your practices, if anyone can share that. Also, the buddy system was commented upon. So again, if anyone can just kind of share, like, how do you actually implement some of these things in your organizations, so that we can all learn, that would be helpful.
Well, to add to
Anyone?
the comments, so I
Yeah,
can just follow
yeah,
up real quick. So
yep.
we're running right now heat stress surveys, quizzes in programs from Caterpillar to AmeriGas to others that have a lot of drivers and vehicles, Walmart included. And those that's it's pretty simple, right? It's training. Everybody's putting out heat stress training right now, recognizing the symptoms of heat stress, and as William was talking about, actually recognizing his own symptoms based on his training. And so it's generally speaking, everybody puts out training this time of year to remind everybody what to look for. The question is, are they paying attention to the training? And so in all those programs, we pop up a quiz. The quiz obviously recognizes and rewards people for getting 5 questions right about how to recognize it. And so it may seem simple, but checking a box to take a pledge or taking a 5 question quiz that shows that you actually read the material and understand how to recognize that is far more likely to get a larger and larger percentage of the workforce to truly recognize the signs and not just ignore them. So training reinforcement through the use of quizzes and pledges.
I'm interested to know if anybody trains their management level employees. There's a lot of training focused on the individual driver level, but how about your supervisors and recognizing those warning signs? Does anybody do that?
Yeah, hey Jessica. So yeah, we do, and that's a really good point because we can train our workforces, and we need to obviously, but really foundationally, and where those workforce people are going to go to, first point of contact is going to be your management team. So their training not only has to be in recognizing symptoms, but really getting into the wellness aspect of comorbidities, having the right lifestyle, especially during this time of year. It's time to change some habits. So I think that's a really important point, and I can tell you from where we work. I work at UPS. We spend a lot of time talking to our management team, going through formal training, and then having a lot of touch points, lunch and learn type of sessions. So really good point. And yeah, I can tell you we are working on that. And I'm down here in Texas, so clearly, yeah, we're that, yeah, I'm that guy. So, clearly, that's a really important part of it. And it's not just the training, but it's also the show of. And what I mean by that is, for example, we use mission gear. We distribute that to our workforce, but really setting the right culture. In our morning meetings, having our supervisors or our managers wearing their heat gear. When they do their on-area inspections of drivers, which we do quite a bit, making sure their heat gear is on, because you also want to create a culture where everybody's all in. So it's not just the education, but it's also the demonstration of. And I think the cooling gear, in addition to hydration, it's all part of that. So I know it's kind of long-winded, but to answer your question, yes, we do train our management workforce.
That's great.
And
To
just
your point, I think. Go ahead.
one thing, great points that Richard made there is it's so unique with drivers and the population that you're speaking to is so many times they work by themselves, right? I do a lot of work with construction or oil and gas and a lot of other work settings. They're usually around colleagues all through the day. And this is such a unique issue that you really have to consider with this population. Why education is even more important for these people is that they have to do a lot of self-care because they're not going to have other people keeping an eye on them as closely.
You're right, Dr. Costas, and that's really important because let's face it, they're independent workers. I mean,
Hmm.
yeah, we see them for this much of their day,
Exactly.
but the
Yes.
reality is how well have you influenced them throughout their very busy work schedules that they're going to be cognizant of the fact that they need to cool, they need to hydrate, they need a body check,
Yes.
taking their proper break. So yes, that's been a culture change for us and one that we're still working through, but nonetheless, very very good point.
Yes. Thank you.
Besides a buddy system, are there any other activities that you guys engage in to keep a check on your drivers? To Dr. Costa's point, they're largely independent. How do you check in on them?
I know at Pepsi, Jessica, managers will send out text to everybody. Hey, heat index is this. How much water have you drank today? So kind of a dialing in with their employees saying, we're kind of a check, a self check. Hey, are you sweating today? How much water have you drank? So just kind of a reminder out to those drivers like you were talking about, Richard. Sometimes we don't make that contact with, but we make that effort in the middle of the day, toward the end of the day. Hey, how are you doing today? I noticed that you're still out. Have you drank enough water? These type of things. I see the managers that do that. In that culture that Richard talked about, really, you really see the difference in the workforce. And instead of a guy feeling like the Lone Ranger out there. So, but
Right.
really drives the culture.
That's a great point, Phil. Thank you. Well, we only have 4 minutes left, so I'm gonna kick it to Peter for a closing remark. And just to let you know, all of the resources that have been shared today throughout the presentation, we will get those to you as resources. Peter?
Yeah, thank you, Jess. I think the sign for me of a good conversation is robust interaction and questions, and certainly was that. And so I want to thank our panelists here today, and I want to thank Jessica and Tara from Quirky for facilitating this. And on behalf of Together for Safer Roads, I hope you found it interesting and insightful. We will pull together the information and share it back out with you. If there are specific people that were on this call that you want to connect with afterwards, just email me or Jess, and we'll make those connections for you. That's important for us to make sure we're helping to facilitate the information sharing and the networking. For me, I think that the biggest sort of one of the largest takeaways here was around this idea of both the specific interventions, but also helping frame the conversation to management and leadership around some of the economic implications that we all know can help drive and unlock resources to ultimately make it safer for the drivers, for the fleets, and so forth. And so, again, thank you everyone for taking your time. We started on time. We will end on time to be respectful of everyone. So stay cool out there. It is the summer. Have a good rest of the work week. And I look forward to our next conversation. And again, thanks everybody for being part of the community. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks everybody so much.
Thank you.